The kitchen at Marlowe's smelled like brown butter and quiet desperation at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. That was how Cecelia Vance had come to think of it. Not the scent of a Michelin-starred restaurant, not the perfume of ambition plated on white porcelain, but the particular combination of rendered fat and barely suppressed anxiety that hung in the air whenever a reservation list ran long, and the sous chef was already on his second antacid. She'd worked here 14 months. Long enough to know the smell of a bad night before it started. She tied her apron in the narrow corridor beside the cold storage, the same way she did every shift. A left loop, first, then right, pulled tight enough to feel like something real around her waist. The apron was white. Everything at Marlowe's was white. The tablecloths, the walls, the tiny votive candles that flickered in their crystal holders like they were auditioning for a more dramatic restaurant. "Table 6 is already asking for the sommelier," said Prentice, the floor manager, passing her without making eye contact. "They haven't sat down yet. I'll handle it," Cecelia said. Prentice paused. "You're not certified. I know the list. I've read every page of the cellar inventory twice." "That's not the same as certified." "I know," she said again, and kept her voice even, and watched him walk away. She had read the cellar inventory twice. She'd also read the full tasting notes on every bottle above $200, memorized the regional breakdown of the French imports, and spent one rainy Sunday afternoon cross-referencing vintages against the chef's current seasonal menu, because she had nothing else to do in the apartment, and her mother had been sleeping, and the silence had needed filling. None of that, as Prentice had correctly noted, amounted to a certification. It was just something Cecelia did, read things, learned things, filed them somewhere in the back of her mind where they waited, patient and unclaimed. She had been doing it her whole life. The private dining room at Marlowe's was called the larder, which Cecelia had always thought was a strange name for a room that served no practical storage function, and instead existed purely to make wealthy people feel like they were eating somewhere secret. It seated 12. It had its own entrance off the side alley, its own lighting system, its own temperature control, and its own unspoken hierarchy of meaning. You didn't get the larder unless you were somebody who expected it. Tonight, the larder had been reserved by the Aldridge group. Cecelia had heard the name before dinner service in the way that names like that always traveled, in fragments through kitchen conversation, half sentences dropped between expo calls. Gordon Aldridge. Tech money, originally, though the money had since diversified into real estate, hospitality, and apparently fine dining experiences booked 3 months in advance. He was, according to what Cecelia had overheard, the kind of man who used the word investment as a substitute for the word interest, as in, he was interested in restaurants the same way a hawk was interested in a field mouse. He had brought 6 guests, a mix of associates and what appeared to be a rotating cast of people whose job it was to laugh at the right moments. Cecelia was assigned to the room. She carried the first round of drinks on a tray the way she always did, back straight, elbow steady, eyes reading the table before she reached it. Aldridge sat at the head, naturally. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of posture that came not from good breeding, but from the specific self-awareness of a man who had been told too many times that he was impressive. His suit was dark and clearly expensive. He was speaking when she arrived, and he didn't stop. "The problem with this city's food scene," he was saying, "is that everyone's confusing complexity with quality. You can teach technique. You can't teach a palate." The people around him nodded with great enthusiasm. Cecelia set down the drinks. She moved quietly, the way she'd trained herself to move in rooms like this, present enough to be useful, invisible enough not to intrude. She was almost at the door when Aldridge said, "What do you think?" She stopped. He was looking directly at her. He had a glass of Barolo already in his hand, though she hadn't poured it yet. Someone must have brought an earlier bottle. He was the kind of man who never waited for service. "I'm sorry," she said. "I asked what you think. About what I said. The food scene." The table was watching. Not all of them. One of the women near the far end was looking at her phone, and the man beside Aldridge appeared to be working through the breadbasket with focused concentration. But enough of them were watching to make the moment feel like something that had been set up. Cecelia recognized the dynamic. She'd seen it before in rooms like this. The powerful man asking the service staff an opinion he didn't actually want, because the exercise of invitation was itself a demonstration of largesse. "I think," she said carefully, "that technique and palate aren't always separate." Aldridge tilted his head. Interested, or performing interest. Meaning that a trained palate is still trained. The education changes what you taste, whether that's better or just different. That's a longer argument. A beat of silence. Then Aldridge smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that acknowledged a response without conceding anything. "You study culinary arts?" "No," Cecelia said. "Then what do you study?" The past tense would have been more accurate. She'd studied biochemistry at Northwestern for 2.5 years before her mother's diagnosis, a phrase she had long since reduced to that single word, diagnosis, because naming the illness in full took up too much space in her chest. She'd come home. She'd taken the job at Marlowe's because it paid better than anything her degree in progress qualified her for, and because the hours let her be home before midnight most nights, and because her mother liked hearing about the food. But she wasn't going to say any of that. "I read a lot," she said. Aldridge laughed. The table followed half a beat behind him. "I'll bet you do," he said, with a warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes, and turned back to his guests. Cecelia finished her exit and let the door close behind her. By 9 o'clock, the larder table had been through 2 bottles of Burgundy, a half bottle of Sauternes, alongside the foie gras, and a disagreement about whether a particular Korean chef in the West Village was a genius or merely a practitioner of what Aldridge had referred to, with some confidence, as borrowed sophistication. Cecelia had refilled waters, cleared plates, delivered a cheese course that the kitchen had prepared with extraordinary care, and that the table acknowledged with the particular disinterest of people who had been eating well all their lives. She didn't mind. She was good at this. The invisibility of it was something she had made her peace with, if not exactly her peace, then her working arrangement. It was during the dessert course that things shifted. One of Aldridge's guests, the younger one, maybe 30, with the loosened tie and the restless energy of someone who'd had 2 glasses too many, pointed at the wine list that Cecelia was quietly repositioning on the sideboard. "Hey," he said, "the list here. What's the best bottle on it?" He was talking to her, but he was also performing for the table. Testing. The way young men in rooms like this sometimes tested service staff, not out of cruelty exactly, but out of a need to locate themselves in a hierarchy. Cecelia glanced at Aldridge. He was watching, his expression unreadable. "Depends what you're looking for," she said. "Best value, the man." She'd heard someone call him Perry, said, "Best juice for the money." For tonight's menu, the Gevrey Chambertin from Rossignol Trapet. 2017 was a strong year. The structure fits the duck and the cheese both, and it's priced below what comparable Burgundy usually runs at this level. A small silence. "That's very specific," Perry said. "You asked." Perry looked at Aldridge. Aldridge was still watching her with that same unreadable expression. Then he said, "She's right, incidentally. That wine is underpriced on this list." "I noticed it earlier." Cecelia said nothing. Aldridge leaned back in his chair. "Tell me something. If you know the list that well, do you know food the same way?" "I know enough," she said. "Enough." He repeated the word as though tasting it and finding it insufficient. "That's modest. It's accurate." One of the women at the table, the one who'd been on her phone earlier, now apparently interested, made a small amused sound. Aldridge smiled again. This time it was different. Not the practiced warmth from earlier. Something more considered, more deliberate. The expression of a man assembling an idea he'd already half-formed. "The kitchen made a dish tonight," he said, "that I thought was technically proficient, but fundamentally misconceived. I want to know if you agree." "I didn't taste it." "You served it." "Yes. So tell me what you observed." The dish had been the seared scallop with yuzu beurre blanc and compressed cucumber. Cecelia had served 4 portions of it. She'd noticed, carrying the 3rd plate, that the sear on the scallop had begun to weep. Just slightly, just at the edge, which meant the pan temperature had dropped between the 1st and 3rd orders. She'd also noticed that the cucumber, while technically compressed, had been cut at a thickness that made the texture fight rather than complement the scallop. She said so. Not everything, not the vocabulary she would have used 2 years ago in a food science seminar, before Northwestern and the diagnosis and the apartment and the apron. But enough. The temperature problem, the knife work. When she finished, the table was quiet. Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the man sitting to his left, someone who'd been introduced earlier as the head chef of one of Aldridge's own restaurant ventures, a man named Durant, who had the compact, self-contained energy of someone who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. Durant was looking at Cecelia with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. "She's right," Durant said simply. "The cucumber was too thick. I mentioned it when they plated." Aldridge's gaze swung back to her. "What's your name?" he said. She said, "Vance. Cecelia Vance." He seemed to consider it. "How long have you worked here?" 14 months. "Before that?" She paused. The pause lasted exactly long enough to be noticeable. "School," she said, "and then not school." He accepted this with a small nod, as though the incompleteness of the answer was itself informative, which she supposed it was. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that it's not a challenge. It's closer to a question I genuinely want answered." Cecelia waited. "There's a dish I've been trying to develop for my new property on the West Side. A tasting menu, 7 courses, prix-fixe. The 4th course has been giving my team problems for 6 months. It's meant to be the pivot, the turn from savory to sweet, and every version they bring me lands on one side or the other. Either it's too savory to pivot, or it's too sweet to land the savory courses before it properly." He paused. "I've described it to 3 consultants in the past 2 months. Do you have any thoughts?" The table had gone very still. It occurred to Cecelia that she was still holding her serving tray. She set it carefully on the sideboard. "What's the anchor ingredient?" she said. Aldridge blinked. Barely, but she caught it. "What?" "The ingredient the dish centers on. What are you building around?" He looked at Durant. Something passed between them. "Stone fruit," Durant said. "Right now, poached white peach, and on the savory end, we've tried it with aged comté, a short rib element, duck liver mousse." "Stop at the comté," Cecelia said. Durant stopped. "White peach and aged comté is actually very close," she said. "The fat in the cheese and the acid in the fruit are the right conversation. The problem is probably that you're serving the peach too sweet. If it's poached in a standard simple syrup, you're pushing it toward dessert before the cheese can hold it back. Try an unsweetened poach with white wine, a little thyme, maybe a small amount of white wine vinegar to keep the acidity savory. The comté does the rest. the sweetness of the fruit, reads as fruit, not as sugar. The course lands in the middle. Silence. Not the polite, performative silence of people pretending to consider something. A different kind. The kind that fills a room when something has actually landed. Durant was writing something on the back of a small card he'd produced from his jacket pocket. His handwriting was quick and economical. Aldridge had not moved. "Where?" he said finally, very quietly. "Did you learn that?" Cecelia thought about Northwestern. About the food science elective she'd taken in her second year because the biochemistry prerequisites had left a gap in her Thursday afternoon schedule. About her professor, a small, tightly wound woman named Dr. Shen, who had believed with a convert's passion that flavor chemistry was the future of culinary arts, and who had assigned reading that Cecelia had stayed up until 2 in the morning completing, not because she had to, but because she couldn't stop. About the Thursday her mother had called her in the middle of lecture, about driving home, about the apartment, and the apron, and the smell of Marlowe's kitchen at 7:30. "I read a lot," she said. Again, the same words, but this time nobody laughed. Aldridge asked her to stay after the table cleared. She asked Prentice, who looked at her with an expression halfway between confusion and suspicion, but nodded because Aldridge was the kind of name that moved through a manager's hesitation, like water through a screen. The larder was quieter without the table. The votives had burned lower. Someone from the kitchen had come to reset it, but Aldridge had waved them off, and now it was just the two of them and the guttering candlelight and the particular weight of a conversation that hadn't started yet. He sat. He gestured at the chair across from him. Cecelia did not sit. Not immediately. She looked at the chair, and then at him, and weighed the geometry of it. The table between them, the respective positions, what it meant to accept the offer on his terms versus on her own. And then she sat, because the chair was a chair, and she was tired of standing, and because she was done performing caution for the benefit of people who weren't watching. "I want to ask you something directly," Aldridge said. "You've been doing that all evening," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Fair, then I'll continue." He set his wine glass down. "You have knowledge that took someone real work to accumulate, and you're serving tables, not because you want to, I think, because something happened." Cecelia said nothing. "I'm not asking what happened," he said. "That's not my business. I'm asking what you want." What she wanted. The question sat in the room, like something she hadn't expected to be asked in this particular lighting, on this particular night. What she wanted was for her mother's prescriptions to cost less. What she wanted was to go back to Northwestern and finish the 2.5 years she'd abandoned when without it, meaning that the 1.5 years in between had been wasted. What she wanted was to not have to choose between the life she'd been building and the person she'd come home for. "I want a lot of things," she said. "That's not unusual." "No," he agreed, "but most people in your position stop thinking about the things they want. They think about the things they need. It's efficient, also deadening." He tilted his glass slowly. "I notice you haven't stopped." She held herself very still. It was the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in 14 months, and she resented it slightly. The way you resented something true that came from an unexpected direction. "What are you offering?" she said. Because she was done pretending not to understand the shape of the conversation. "Aldridge Group is opening a new property in March," he said. 7-course tasting menu, as I mentioned. I've been looking for a development consultant, someone who understands flavor logic, can work with my kitchen team, can think about how a menu tells a story from the first course to the last. It's not a cooking position. He paused, searching, more like editing. You work with what the chefs create. You identify where the story loses the thread. I don't have credentials, she said. Not in food. I have 2.5 years of biochemistry and 14 months of carrying plates. I know, he said. That's not what I'm hiring. She looked at him for a moment, looked at him properly, in the way she'd been carefully not doing all evening, because looking at powerful men properly was something Marlowe's had trained her against, slowly, over 14 months, the way water erodes stone, not all at once but continuously, until you look up one day and the shape of something has changed. He looked like a man who was used to being right about investments. She thought about Dr. Shen, about poached stone fruit, about the flavor chemistry textbook she'd found at a used bookstore on Clark Street 2 months after she'd left school, which she'd bought for $6 because she couldn't afford the course, but she could still afford the reading. I need to think about it, she said. Aldridge nodded. He drew a card from his jacket, a simple card, matte stock, just a name and a number, and placed it on the table between them, not handed to her. Placed. The difference felt deliberate. Take whatever time you need, he said. That doesn't have an expiration date. He stood. She stood. They were the same height approximately, which surprised her, and she wasn't sure why. One more thing, he said. She waited. The recommendation you made tonight about the peach course. Durant is going to try it this week. He paused. If it works, I'll want you to know that you were right. Not as a formality, because it matters, when a person is right, that they know it. Cecelia picked up the card. She held it in 2 fingers, the way you hold something small that might be more significant than it looks. I usually know, she said. He considered that, nodded once, seriously, as though she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he left, and the candles were very low, and the room smelled like cold wax and stone fruit and the particular quiet that follows a shift in something. The call came on Friday. Cecelia was at the apartment, on the small couch that faced the window that faced the alley, with her mother asleep in the back room and a library copy of a culinary history textbook open on her lap. She'd been reading the chapter on the development of French haute cuisine, with the focused calm of someone who reads not to be transported, but to be informed, which was its own kind of transportation. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. She answered it. It was Durant. His voice was the same as it had been in the larder, compact, economical, the voice of a man who had things to say and preferred to say them quickly. The peach course, he said. We ran the test this morning, unsweetened poach, white wine, thyme white wine vinegar, as you said. A pause. It was exactly right. Cecelia looked at the alley. A pigeon was doing something administrative on the fire escape. I'm glad, she said. Aldridge asked me to call. Another pause, slightly longer than the first. I wanted to call anyway. I've been cooking for 18 years. What you described. The interaction between the fruit acid and the Comté fat. That's not something most cooks articulate that clearly after 18 months in a kitchen, let alone after serving it. I read the flavor pairing science, she said. It's not. I know what it is, Durant said. I also know what it isn't. It isn't common. He cleared his throat. Aldridge's offer stands. I wanted you to know that my recommendation stands too, which he didn't ask me to say, but there it is. Cecelia set the textbook on the armrest. She looked at the card on the side table. The matte card, the name, the number. She'd placed it there Tuesday night when she got home, and she'd looked at it every morning, since in the way you look at something, you haven't decided how to feel about yet. I have a question, she said. Go ahead. The position, the development consulting role. Is it full-time? It can be structured however works, Durant said. Aldridge is flexible. On that, he wants the right person more than he wants the right schedule. She thought about her mother's Thursday appointments, about the specific window of time each week that needed protecting. about the biochemistry transcripts still in the folder under her bed, the ones she'd been thinking about sending to Northwestern's Red Mission Office, the ones she'd been thinking about for 8 months without sending. "I'd need Thursdays," she said. "Thursdays are fine," Durant said. She exhaled, slowly. The pigeon departed the fire escape without fanfare. "Then yes," Cecelia said. "Tell him yes." A short silence on the line. When Durant spoke again, she thought she heard something in his voice that might have been satisfaction, though he delivered it with the same economy as everything else. "He'll be pleased," Durant said. "So will I." After she hung up, Cecelia sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment. The textbook was open to a diagram of flavor compounds. The card was on the side table. Her mother was sleeping in the back room, breathing evenly, as she'd been doing more easily in the last few weeks since they'd adjusted the medication. She thought about the larder, about the low candles and the stone fruit, and the man who'd placed a card on a table rather than handing it to her, as if he understood that the distinction mattered. She thought about the things she wanted, and the things she needed, and the slowly diminishing distance between them. She picked up the textbook, found her page. She had 3 more chapters to get through before the appointment Thursday, and she read the way she always had. Not because she was supposed to, not because anyone was watching, but because the words were there, and her mind was there, and in the space between those 2 things, something kept becoming possible.